Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. It began simply enough, an unfamiliar bell ringing exactly at noon, somewhere just beyond my sight. The melody, a strangely muted chime, echoed softly through the walls, slipping into the fabric of my daily routine. At first, it was only a curiosity, an oddity tucked between the shuffle of papers and the hum of distant traffic. But as the days wore on, the predictability of its intrusion became unsettling. Each toll was accompanied by a faint shuffle in the corner of my vision, a shadow that never moved differently, never out of place. The sound persisted without pause, always precisely as the second hand of the clock aligned with the hour. I would listen intently, trying to catch the source of the sound, to follow it to its origin. Yet, each attempt only met the same conclusion, a fruitless search compounded by an eerie sense of déjà vu. The bell and the whispering shadows felt like an invisible presence looping within the confines of my world. The atmosphere remained stagnant, like the air in a room closed too long, thick and unwavering. I tried to ignore it, to let my mind drift beyond its confines, but the pattern held me tethered. Each day, the bell rang, the shadows shifted, and I remained ensnared in a routine that seemed to defy time itself. The repetition grew heavier, the details sharper with every noon that passed, until the chime became my only constant in a reality that refused to change. I remember placing my coffee mug on the left side of my desk that first morning. The ceramic handle pointed toward the window, catching the pale light filtering through half-closed blinds. When I returned from the kitchen, the mug sat on the right side, handle facing inward. The coffee was still warm, steam still rising in delicate spirals. I must have moved it without thinking. The next morning, I placed the mug deliberately on the left side again. I watched it for several heartbeats before turning away to retrieve a file from the cabinet. When I looked back, the mug remained exactly where I had left it. The handle still pointed toward the window, but the steam rose differently now, curling counterclockwise instead of the natural clockwise spiral I had observed moments before. I began to pay attention to other details. The stack of papers on my desk changed order throughout the morning, though I never touched them. The top document shifted from a budget report to a memo, then back again. The words remained the same, but the letterhead seemed somehow different each time I glanced at it. The font appeared slightly bolder, or perhaps thinner, the margins wider, then narrower. The scent of burnt paper began to permeate the room, though I had lit no fires, used no matches. The smell was strongest near the window, where dampness should have dominated from the recent rains. Instead, the acrid odor of charred documents filled my nostrils, mixing strangely with the musty atmosphere of the closed space. The bell rang again, and I felt the familiar shuffle in my peripheral vision. But this time, I caught something else. The shadow moved 1 second behind my own movements. When I raised my hand, my reflection in the window glass responded immediately, but the shadow on the wall delayed, following a heartbeat later. I tested this discovery, waving my arm deliberately. The window showed my movement in real time, but the shadow lagged, as if processing my actions through some invisible filter. I decided to document these inconsistencies. I opened a notebook and began to write. The pen felt heavier than usual in my fingers, the ink flowing too thickly across the paper. I wrote, "The mug moves positions. The shadows are delayed. The smell of burning where there should be dampness." When I looked down at the page, the words had changed. The handwriting was mine, but the message read, "The mug remains constant. The shadows move precisely. The smell of dampness where there should be burning." I stared at the text, certain I had written something entirely different. I could still feel the memory of forming those other words, the specific movements of my hand across the paper. I tore out the page and started again. This time I wrote more carefully. Today is the day I noticed the inconsistencies. But as I formed the final letter, the sentence rearranged itself before my eyes. Today is the day the inconsistencies noticed me. The bell chimed again, though I was certain it had already rung. Or perhaps it was about to ring. The sound seemed to echo both forward and backward through time, reverberating against moments that hadn't yet occurred, and memories that felt increasingly uncertain. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. The street outside appeared normal. Cars passed at regular intervals. Pedestrians moved along the sidewalk with purposeful strides. Everything seemed exactly as it should be. But when I pressed my face closer to the glass, I noticed the cars were the same cars, passing in the same sequence. The pedestrians walked identical paths, their steps synchronized to an invisible metronome. stretched for what felt like an hour, though the clock on my desk insisted only minutes had passed. The same blue sedan drove by, followed by the same delivery truck, followed by the same woman in a red coat. Then the sequence repeated. Blue sedan, delivery truck, woman in red coat. The pattern continued without variation, a loop of normalcy that felt more disturbing than any obvious abnormality would have been. Returning to my desk, I found the notebook open to a page I didn't remember writing. The text was in my handwriting, but the words felt foreign. The observer becomes the observed. The watcher becomes the watched. The teller becomes the told. I don't recall writing those words. They seem like something someone else might have written. Someone who understood the situation better than I did. Someone who had been watching me discover these inconsistencies, documenting my confusion with clinical detachment. The coffee mug had moved again. This time it sat in the center of the desk, perfectly aligned with the edge of the notebook. The handle pointed directly at me, as if the mug itself were watching. The coffee inside had grown cold, though I had just poured it. Or had I? The memory felt slippery, uncertain. Perhaps I had been drinking the same cup of coffee for hours, or days, or longer. I tried to remember what I had eaten for breakfast, but the memory wouldn't solidify. I could recall sitting at a table, holding utensils, the motion of bringing food to my mouth. But the specific details, what food, what flavor, what texture, remained frustratingly vague. It was as if someone had carefully erased the sensory details while leaving the mechanical actions intact. The shadows on the wall began to move independently of any light source. They shifted and stretched, forming patterns that almost resembled writing. I squinted at them, trying to decipher their meaning, but the shapes dissolved whenever I focused too intently. In my peripheral vision, they seemed to spell out words, messages, warnings. But direct observation revealed only the ordinary shadows of furniture and window frames. I decided to leave the room. Perhaps a change of environment would break whatever strange loop I had fallen into. I walked to the door and turned the handle. The hallway beyond looked exactly as it always had: beige walls, worn carpet, a series of identical doors stretching toward the exit. But as I stepped into the hallway, I felt a strange, doubling sensation. I was walking forward, but also watching myself walk forward from behind. I could see my own back, my own footsteps, my own movement through the corridor. Yet, I was still experiencing the walk from my own perspective, feeling the carpet beneath my feet, seeing the walls pass by on either side. The exit door approached, then receded, then approached again. I seemed to be making progress and standing still simultaneously. The hallway stretched and contracted like an accordion, playing a silent tune of spatial impossibility. When I finally reached the exit, I pushed open the door and found myself back in my room, standing in front of my desk. The coffee mug sat in its original position on the left side, handle pointing toward the window. The notebook lay closed, its pages blank. The clock showed the same time it had when I first noticed the inconsistencies, but something fundamental had changed. I could feel it in the quality of the air, in the way the light fell across the floor, in the rhythm of my own breathing. I was still myself, but also somehow not myself. The voice in my head that narrated my thoughts sounded slightly different, as if someone else were speaking my internal monologue. I am still in the room. The bell still rings with perfect regularity. The shadows still move with their strange delay. But now I understand that these observations are not entirely my own. Someone or something else is noticing these details through my senses, documenting these experiences through my consciousness. The notebook opens itself to a new page. Words appear in handwriting that resembles mine, but feels foreign. The transfer is complete. The narrative continues. The observer has been successfully integrated. I watch my hand write these words, but I am not controlling the movement. My fingers move with practiced efficiency, forming letters I did not intend to create. The pen feels familiar and alien simultaneously, an extension of a hand that may or may not belong to me. The room settles into its familiar routine. The mug sits precisely where it should sit. The papers arrange themselves in their proper order. The shadows align perfectly with their sources. Everything appears exactly as it always has, with a precision that feels manufactured rather than natural. The bell rings one final time, or perhaps one first time. The sound echoes with perfect clarity, unmarred by the strange distortions that had previously accompanied it. The melody is simple, predictable, comforting in its regularity. I return to my daily routine with mechanical efficiency. papers shuffle in the correct sequence. The coffee maintains its proper temperature. The light falls at the appropriate angle through the blinds. Every detail aligns with perfect normalcy, as if the inconsistencies had never occurred. Yet something lingers at the edge of consciousness, a memory of displacement, of being watched, of watching myself be watched. The sensation fades as I focus on the tasks before me, but it never disappears entirely. It remains as a faint background hum, like the distant sound of traffic that becomes audible only when everything else falls silent. The story continues as it always has, narrated by a voice that speaks with my inflection, but carries the weight of someone else's observations. The words flow naturally, describing a reality that feels both intimately familiar and subtly foreign. Everything is exactly as it should be. Story 2. The wood feels different again. Not rough, not smooth. Something between. I pressed my palm flat against it this morning and swore I felt letters forming beneath my skin. When I pulled away, nothing. Just the same grain pattern I've memorized over countless meals. Entry fragment. I found myself standing in the kitchen, holding a cup of something cold. Coffee, maybe, but I don't remember making it. The taste was bitter, metallic. I poured it down the sink and watched the dark liquid spiral away, leaving stains that looked almost like words. The table called me back. Entry fragment. There's a sound coming from underneath. Not creaking, not settling. Something softer, like fingernails tapping against wood from the inside. I got down on my hands and knees, pressed my ear to the floor, but heard only the hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. When I stood up, there were marks on the table's surface. Faint impressions, as if someone had been writing with invisible ink. Entry fragment. I traced the patterns with my index finger. They form shapes that almost make sense, almost spell something. The wood is warm where the marks appear, cool everywhere else. My fingertip tingles with each pass, like touching a live wire wrapped in velvet. The sensation follows me even when I leave the room. Entry fragment. I tried eating dinner at the counter instead. Stood there with my plate, fork scraping against ceramic, but my eyes kept drifting to the empty table. It seemed to pulse in my peripheral vision. When I finally looked directly at it, the surface appeared completely normal, but my fingers remembered the texture. The secret message hidden in plain sight. Entry fragment. The marks are deeper now. I can see them in certain light, shallow grooves that weren't there before. Or maybe they were always there, and I'm just now learning how to look. The wood grain seems to shift around them, flowing like water around stones. I spend hours running my hands across the surface, mapping every imperfection. Entry fragment. Someone knocked on the door while I was tracing the patterns. I ignored it. The knocking stopped, but I heard footsteps circling the house. When I looked out the window, no one was there. Just my own reflection staring back, fingers still pressed against the glass. The table was waiting when I returned. Entry fragment. I can read some of the words now. They appear when I'm not looking directly, visible only in the corner of my eye. Short phrases that don't quite connect. Beneath the surface, and always listening, and something that might be my own name, though the letters keep shifting. My fingertips are raw from all the tracing. Entry fragment. I brought a pencil and paper to the table, tried to make rubbings of the impressions. The paper came away blank, but my hand moved without conscious direction, sketching symbols I don't recognize. They look familiar anyway, like a language I spoke in dreams. The pencil lead broke 3 times. Entry fragment. The wood is speaking more clearly now. Not in words exactly, but in sensations that translate to meaning. It tells me about the tree it came from, about the hands that shaped it, about all the meals and conversations it has witnessed, about the secrets people whispered while their palms rested on its surface. It wants to tell me more. Entry fragment. I sleep at the table now. My cheek against the wood, fingers spread wide to catch every vibration. The messages come clearer in the space between waking and dreaming. Instructions, maybe, or invitations. The grain pattern has rearranged itself into a map of somewhere I've never been, but somehow know. The wood is warm, always warm. Entry fragment. My reflection in the window looks wrong. The person staring back has hollow eyes and fingers that never stop moving, tracing invisible patterns in the air. I wave, and she waves back, but her movements are just slightly off, like a poorly dubbed film. The table knows the truth about reflections. Entry fragment. I understand now why the surface felt different that first morning. It was preparing me, teaching my skin to read its hidden language. Every breakfast, every dinner, every casual touch was part of the lesson. The wood has been patient, waiting for me to become fluent in its whispers. I am almost ready for the final message. Entry fragment. The marks cover the entire surface now, overlapping and interweaving like a tapestry of secrets. My fingers know exactly where to touch, which patterns to trace, how much pressure to apply. The wood responds with warmth and vibration, guiding me deeper into its story. I am part of the table now, or it is part of me. Entry fragment. The boundary between wood and skin has dissolved. When I press my palm against the surface, I cannot tell where I end and it begins. The grain flows up my arms, across my shoulders, mapping new territories of sensation. The table's memories become my memories. The wood whispers my new name, and I whisper back story 3. Each evening, without fail, the lamp in the corner softly clicks on at exactly 7:20, casting the same halo of muted golden light across the room. The first few times, I credited it to a fault in the wiring, or perhaps some phantom glitch in its aged mechanisms. Yet, as days trickled into weeks, the timing remained uncannily precise. The light flickers twice, a barely perceptible hesitation, before settling into a steady glow. A small, ornate table beneath it holds a single book, always open to the same page, a page I have never turned. Occasionally, I attempt to move the lamp or close the book, but each night they return to their places, the ritual beginning anew. The air feels dense with a silent anticipation, an expectant whisper that never forms words, despite my attempts to resist, to stray from this looping pattern. The evening brings its inevitability, cradling me in the embrace of repetition, while my mind strains against the invisible boundaries that refuse to yield. I began watching from my chair across the room, positioned just so that the lamp remained in my peripheral vision. The clicking sound carries a weight that seems impossible for such a delicate mechanism. It resonates through the floorboards, vibrating up through my feet and settling somewhere behind my ribs. The golden light doesn't behave like ordinary illumination. It moves with deliberate slowness, crawling across surfaces rather than simply falling upon them. The book beneath the lamp draws my attention with increasing intensity. Its pages appear yellowed, I cannot recall purchasing anything so aged. The text visible from my vantage point consists of symbols that shift when I'm not looking directly at them. Letters rearrange themselves into patterns that almost form words, then dissolve back into meaningless marks. The binding appears leather, though its surface reflects light in a way that leather should not. My observations became more systematic. I positioned myself closer each evening, moving my chair inch by careful inch until I could discern individual characters on the open page. The text seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the lamp's initial flickers. 2 quick beats, then steady persistence. The symbols reminded me of handwriting, though no hand I could imagine would form letters with such precise uniformity. The silence between the lamp's activation and my own breathing grows longer each night. During these stretches, the room holds its breath alongside me. Dust motes suspend themselves in the golden beam, motionless as if trapped in amber. The air becomes viscous, requiring effort to draw into my lungs. My skin prickles with the sensation of being observed, though I remain alone in the room. I began to notice changes in my reflection when I glanced at the lamp's polished base. My face appeared distorted, features sliding slightly out of alignment. My eyes seemed larger, pupils dilated despite the bright light. The reflection moved a fraction of a second after I did, creating a disorienting echo of my own movements. I stopped looking at reflective surfaces in the room. The lamp's glow began extending beyond its physical boundaries. Tendrils of light crept along the walls, following the seams where wallpaper met baseboards. These extensions moved with purpose, exploring the room's architecture as if mapping its dimensions. The golden radiance seeped into corners that should have remained shadowed, illuminating spaces that felt private, untouchable. My chair migrated closer without my conscious decision. Each evening, I found myself positioned nearer to the lamp, though I couldn't recall moving. The book's pages became clearer, revealing text that seemed familiar despite its alien appearance. Words formed in my mind as I stared at the symbols, though I never learned their translation. The meaning arrived fully formed, bypassing the need for comprehension. The sensation of being watched intensified. Something positioned itself behind my left shoulder, just outside the range of my peripheral vision. Its presence carried weight and warmth, like a person standing too close. When I turned to look, Nothing occupied the space, yet the feeling persisted. The presence breathed in rhythm with the lamps pulsing, creating a harmony that made my own breathing feel intrusive. The lamps clicking began occurring at different intervals. Sometimes the sound preceded the illumination by several heartbeats. Other evenings, light appeared first, followed by the mechanical noise that seemed to originate from within the walls rather than the lamp itself. The golden glow took on texture, feeling rough against my skin when it touched me. The warmth carried an electric quality that made my hair stand on end. My reflection disappeared entirely from the lamp's base. The polished surface showed only the room behind me, as if I had become transparent. Other reflective surfaces in the room began displaying the same phenomenon. Mirrors reflected empty space where I should have stood. Windows showed only the room's interior, never my face looking back. I existed in the space between observation and visibility. The book's pages turned themselves while I watched. The movement occurred slowly, deliberately, revealing new text that rearranged itself as I read. The symbols formed patterns that hurt to perceive directly, creating afterimages that lingered when I closed my eyes. The meaning of the text became clearer with each viewing, though I could never articulate what I had learned. Knowledge accumulated without understanding. The presence behind my shoulder began moving. It circled the room during the lamp's illumination, always remaining just beyond direct perception. Its footsteps made no sound, but I felt the floorboards respond to its weight. The air displaced by its movement brushed against my neck, carrying a scent like old paper and copper. The presence grew more substantial each evening, gaining definition through proximity. The lamp's light began emanating from my own skin. Golden radiance seeped through my pores, casting the same warm glow across the room. My hands became translucent, revealing networks of light flowing beneath the surface. The illumination felt natural, as if I had always possessed this capability and was only now remembering how to access it. The lamp in the corner dimmed as my own brightness increased. The book's text appeared on my arms, symbols writing themselves across my skin in the same golden light. The words moved beneath the surface, traveling from my fingertips to my shoulders in continuous loops. I could feel the meaning of each character as it passed through me, knowledge flowing like warm liquid through my veins. The book on the table remained open, though its pages pages now showed only blank paper. My chair faced away from the lamp, though I never moved it. The room appeared different from this new perspective, walls stretching higher than before, corners extending into impossible angles. The lamp cast light in directions that defied geometry, illuminating surfaces that shouldn't exist. My shadow fell in multiple directions simultaneously, each silhouette moving independently of the others. The presence behind my shoulder merged with my own outline. I felt its weight settling into my bones, its breathing synchronizing with my lungs. We shared the same space without conflict, two forms occupying identical coordinates. The sensation felt like coming home, like remembering something I had forgotten long ago. The boundary between observer and observed dissolved completely. The lamp clicks on without making sound. Its light emerges from surfaces throughout the room, from the walls, from the air itself. The book reads itself, pages turning in rhythm with breathing that belongs to no one and everyone. The chair sits empty, though something occupies it completely. The room watches itself through eyes that see everything and nothing. The observation continues without an observer. The light emanates from sources that cast no shadows. The presence fills every space while remaining absent. The text writes itself into existence, symbols forming meaning that requires no comprehension. The ritual completes itself endlessly, perfectly, without beginning or end. The lamp has always been on. The book has always been open. The chair has always been occupied. The watching never stops, though no one watches. The light flows through everything, illuminating nothing. The presence encompasses all space while existing nowhere. The observation observes itself, complete and eternal, requiring no witness to verify its reality. Story 4. It was late afternoon when I settled into my usual spot at the old wooden table, a cup of tea steaming softly beside me. The autumn light filtered through the curtains, painting warm patterns on the paper beneath my hand. The page in my notebook lay open, its crisp, blank expanse inviting my thoughts. As I reached for my pen, the air in the room seemed to still, the quiet almost tangible. My focus sharpened on the notebook. The pages were subtly crinkled, whispering with the memory of countless sketches and musings. But from the corner of my eye, I noticed a subtle, uncanny shift, a singular page slowly curling upward, as if drawn by an unseen hand. The delicate, repetitive sound of paper folding resonated in the silence, each crinkle crisp and deliberate. I blinked, certain my eyes deceived me, but the page continued its slow ascent, each crease forming with purpose. A chill brushed over my skin, the room's warmth suddenly distant. As I leaned closer, the paper seemed to hold its breath, the fine lines of its texture whispering secrets only it could know. The page settled back against its neighbors with a soft sigh. My fingertips hovered above it, feeling the faintest tremor in the air. The paper felt different now, its surface slightly cooler than the others, as though it had absorbed something from the space around it. When I pressed my palm flat against it, the texture seemed to shift beneath my touch, becoming smoother, almost silk-like. I lifted my hand and watched. The page remained still, ordinary, innocent, but the sensation lingered on my skin, a phantom coolness that crept up my wrist. The tea beside me had stopped steaming, though I couldn't recall when the vapor had ceased its gentle dance. The liquid inside had grown cloudy, tiny particles swirling in lazy spirals that caught what little light remained. My pen felt heavier than usual as I picked it up. The ink flowed differently, creating lines that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. I began to sketch without conscious thought, my hand moving across the page in gentle curves and angles. The marks appeared darker than they should have been, as if the paper were drinking the ink, pulling it deeper into its fibers. The room around me began to breathe. Not the walls themselves, but the space between them, expanding and contracting in a rhythm that matched my own heartbeat. The curtains swayed without any breeze, their fabric whispering against itself in a language I almost understood. The sound was hypnotic, drawing my attention away from the notebook, though my hand continued its unconscious sketching. When I looked back down, the page was filled with intricate patterns I didn't remember creating. Spirals within spirals, each line connecting to the next in an endless maze of ink. The drawing seemed to move in my peripheral vision, the lines shifting and rearranging themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. But each time I focused on a specific section, it remained perfectly still, exactly as I had drawn it. Or had I drawn it at all? The question drifted through my mind like smoke, impossible to grasp. My fingers traced the lines I had supposedly made, feeling their slight indentations in the paper. real, tangible, yet foreign to me. The patterns reminded me of something I had seen before, though I couldn't place where or when. They tugged at a memory that remained frustratingly out of reach. I turned the page, seeking a fresh start, but the next sheet bore similar markings, fainter, as if the ink had somehow bled through from the previous page, but there nonetheless. The patterns were different, yet related, like variations on a theme I was only beginning to understand. Each page I turned revealed more of the same, the designs growing progressively clearer as I moved deeper into the notebook. The air in the room had thickened, becoming almost viscous. Each breath required more effort than the last, and the oxygen tasted different, metallic, and slightly sweet. The walls seemed closer than before, though when I looked directly at them, they appeared to be in their proper places. It was only in my peripheral vision that they crept inward, narrowing the space around me with each passing moment. I stood, the chair scraping against the floor with a sound that lingered longer than it should have. The floorboards beneath my feet felt softer, giving slightly with each step as I moved toward the window. The curtains parted at my touch, revealing a view that wasn't quite right. The familiar landscape beyond had shifted subtly, colors muted and shapes slightly askew, as if I were viewing it through water. Behind me, I heard the soft whisper of pages turning. I spun around to find the notebook open to a different section, one I was certain I hadn't reached. The page displayed a single, perfectly circular spiral that seemed to draw my gaze inward. The longer I stared, the deeper it appeared to become, as if the ink had carved a tunnel through the paper and into something beyond. My legs carried me back to the table without my conscious direction. The spiral filled my vision, its center a point of absolute darkness that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. I reached out to touch it, my finger hovering just above the paper's surface. The air above the spiral felt different, charged with an energy that made my skin tingle. The moment my fingertip made contact with the center of the spiral, the room around me shifted. Not dramatically, not with any sound or violence, but with the subtle inevitability of water finding its level. The walls breathed more deeply. The floor beneath my feet became more yielding, and the air grew thicker still, wrapping around me like a gentle embrace. I tried to lift my finger from the page, but found I couldn't. Not because it was stuck, but because the action felt wrong, incomplete. spiral was pulling something from me, or perhaps giving something in return. The sensation was neither pleasant nor unpleasant, simply necessary, like breathing or blinking. The notebook began to write itself. My hand moved across the pages, guided by something beyond my control, filling sheet after sheet with patterns and symbols that felt both alien and intimately familiar. The ink flowed like liquid starlight, creating designs that hurt to look at directly, but called to something deep within my consciousness. The room continued its slow transformation around me. The furniture grew softer, more organic in shape, as if carved from living wood that had never quite died. The curtains moved with increasing frequency, their fabric now translucent, revealing glimpses of a landscape that shifted each time I looked away and back again. My reflection in the window had changed as well. The face looking back at me was still mine, but subtly altered. The eyes were darker, more knowing, and the mouth held secrets I couldn't remember learning. When I smiled, my reflection smiled back, but a fraction of a second too late, as if it were learning to mimic me rather than simply being me. The notebook was nearly full now, its pages heavy with ink and intention. Each design was more complex than the last, spirals branching into fractals that contained entire worlds within their curves. I could lose myself in any single pattern, following its path deeper and deeper, until I forgot where I had begun or where I was trying to go. The tea in my cup had long since gone cold, but when I lifted it to my lips, the liquid was warm and tasted of things I had no names for. Flavors that existed only in dreams, and half-remembered moments from a childhood that might not have been my own. Each sip made the room feel more real and less real simultaneously, as if I were dissolving the boundary between what was and what could be. The final page of the notebook lay before me, blank and expectant. My hand hovered above it, pen poised, waiting for the design that would complete whatever work I had begun. But this time, I hesitated. Some instinct warned me that once this page was filled, there would be no going back, no return to the simple afternoon when I had sat down to sketch and think. Yet the hesitation felt artificial, like a memory of caution rather than genuine fear. The pen touched the paper of its own accord, beginning the final spiral. This one was different from all the others, not just a pattern, but a doorway, an invitation, key turning in a lock I hadn't known existed. As the spiral neared completion, the room around me began to fade, not into darkness, but into something else entirely. The walls became suggestions, the floor a memory, the ceiling a possibility. I was dissolving into the pattern I had created, or perhaps the pattern was dissolving into me. The distinction no longer mattered. The last line of the spiral connected with the first, creating a perfect circle of infinite depth. The notebook closed itself with a soft whisper, the sound echoing in a space that was no longer quite a room. I sat in my chair that was no longer quite a chair, in an afternoon that had become something altogether different. When I opened my eyes, I was still there, still me, still holding my pen above the open notebook. But the pages were blank, waiting to be filled, and the afternoon light filtered through curtains that moved without wind. The tea beside me steamed gently, though I could have sworn it had grown cold. I reached for my pen, ready to begin again, knowing somehow that I had done this before and would do it again, each time discovering new patterns, new spirals, new ways to reshape the space around me. The page beneath my hand whispered with possibility, and I smiled, recognizing the sound of paper that held secrets only it could know. The cycle was complete, and yet it was only beginning. Story 5. The soft rattle of the spoon against porcelain is the first sound that greets me each morning, echoing gently like a forgotten lullaby. It moves in circles, tracing paths through the silence, a comforting ritual that never quite feels the same twice. Today, though, a whisper of unease curls around the clinks, a slight discord that dances at the edge of my hearing. I stir, waiting for the subtle click, the one that announces that the long silent toaster has finally come to life. But today, it stutters before it sings. The crisp crackle of bread meeting heat strangely muted, like a phrase half spoken. The familiar hum of routine wavers, just a heartbeat out of sync, as if the day itself is straining against the confines of its well-worn patterns. The kitchen feels different this morning, though I cannot place exactly how. The light falls through the window at the same angle, casting familiar shadows across the countertop. The refrigerator maintains its steady drone. Yet something in the air itself seems to shimmer with an almost imperceptible tension, like the moment before thunder when the atmosphere holds its breath. I take my first sip of coffee, and notice the taste carries an undertone I've never detected before. Not bitter, not sweet, but something that reminds me of the smell of old paper left too long in sunlight. The sensation lingers on my tongue as I move through the morning routine, each step feeling simultaneously automatic and foreign. The bathroom mirror reflects my face back at me, but the reflection seems to arrive just a fraction too late, as though the glass is processing my image before returning it. I blink, and for the briefest moment, I could swear my reflection blinks first. The fluorescent bulb above flickers once, twice, then settles into its usual harsh glow. But the light feels thinner somehow, as if it's being stretched across a greater distance than the small space between bulb and mirror. Water runs from the faucet in a steady stream, but the sound it makes against the porcelain basin carries an odd resonance, like an echo bouncing off surfaces that shouldn't exist. I cup my hands beneath the flow, and the water feels normal, the right temperature, the right pressure. Yet, when I splash it against my face, droplets seem to cling to my skin longer than they should, as if reluctant to follow gravity's pull. Walking back through the hallway, I notice the floorboards beneath my feet produce their usual creaks and groans, but today they seem to form a pattern I've never heard before. 3 short creaks followed by 2 long ones, repeating as I move from room to room. I pause, listening, then take another step. The pattern shifts slightly, but maintains its underlying rhythm, like a code tapping itself out through the bones of the house. The living room welcomes me with its familiar arrangement of furniture, each piece positioned exactly where it has been for months. The couch faces the window. The small table holds yesterday's book. The lamp stands sentinel in the corner. But the shadows between these objects seem deeper today, more defined, as though they're carving out spaces that weren't there before. I settle into my usual spot on the couch and open the book to where I left off. The words on the page are the same ones I read yesterday, yet they seem to rearrange themselves as I look at them. Subtle shifts in spacing and alignment that make me question whether I'm remembering correctly. The story continues where it should, but certain phrases catch my attention in ways they didn't before, as if they're being highlighted by some invisible hand. A paragraph about morning light filtering through curtains resonates strangely with my own experience. Another passage describing the sound of footsteps in an empty house makes me pause and listen to the silence around me. The The coincidences feel too precise to be random, yet too subtle to be intentional. I close the book and place it back on the table, but it doesn't sit quite the same way it did before. The angle is wrong somehow, as if the table itself has shifted imperceptibly. I adjust the book's position, then adjust it again, but cannot seem to find the arrangement that feels right. Each placement creates a new wrongness, a fresh discord with the room's harmony. The telephone sits silent on its small stand, but I find myself glancing at it repeatedly, expecting it to ring. Not hoping for a call, but sensing that one is coming, the way you might sense approaching rain in the pressure of the air. The anticipation builds with each glance, but the phone maintains its silence, becoming more present in its quietness than it ever was when it actually rang. Outside the window, the world continues its normal rhythm. Trees sway gently in a breeze I cannot feel from inside. A bird lands on the fence post, preens briefly, then flies away. These movements should be random, natural, but they begin to feel choreographed, as if I'm watching a performance designed specifically for my observation. The bird returns to the same post, performs the same brief preening ritual, then departs in exactly the same direction. I watch more carefully now, timing its absence. When it returns again, following the identical pattern, a chill spreads across my shoulders despite the room's warmth. I move to the window for a closer look, pressing my palm against the glass. The surface feels normal, smooth, cool, solid. But when I pull my hand away, the condensation from my palm doesn't fade as quickly as it should. Instead, it seems to pulse gently, expanding and contracting like a slow heartbeat against the transparent barrier. The view through the window begins to feel less like looking out and more like looking into something, as if the glass isn't separating interior from exterior, but rather connecting two versions of the same space. The garden beyond mirrors my own movements too precisely, shadows shifting in response to my gestures, even when the sun's angle shouldn't create such effects. I step back from the window and return to the center of the room, but the feeling of being observed doesn't fade. The sensation comes not from outside, but from the room itself, as if the walls have developed a subtle awareness of my presence. The feeling isn't threatening exactly, but it carries an intensity that makes my skin prickle with heightened sensitivity. The book calls my attention again, though I'm certain I placed it face down on the table. Now it lies open to a different page entirely, one I haven't reached yet in my reading. The exposed text describes a character who notices small changes in their environment, details that shift when they're not looking directly at them. The parallel to my own experience is so exact that I have to read the passage twice to convince myself the words are really there. I flip back to find my original place in the story, but the pages feel different under my fingers, thicker somehow, with a texture that wasn't there before. The bookmark I always use has moved to a completely different section, marking a page that discusses the reliability of memory and perception. I don't remember placing it there, yet the bookmark bears the familiar where patterns of my handling. The house around me continues its subtle transformations. Sounds that should be random begin to synchronize the refrigerator's hum aligning with the tick of settling wood. The whisper of air through vents matching the rhythm of my own breathing. The synchronization is never perfect, always slightly off in a way that draws attention to the attempt itself. I find myself moving through the rooms differently now, paying attention to details I've previously ignored. The way light falls across the kitchen floor reveals patterns in the wood grain that seem to shift depending on my viewing angle. The bathroom faucet drips at irregular intervals that nonetheless feel purposeful, like Morse code transmitted through water and metal. In the bedroom, the sheets on the unmade bed show impressions that don't quite match how I remember sleeping. The pillow holds a depression too perfectly round, too deliberately placed. When I smooth the covers, they resist slightly, as if they prefer their current arrangement to any I might impose. The closet door stands slightly ajar, revealing a slice of darkness that seems more complete than it should be. No light penetrates that narrow opening, even though the room is well lit. I approach slowly, drawn by the absolute quality of that darkness, and push the door wider. Inside, my clothes hang in their usual positions, but they seem to sway gently despite the still air, as if moved by currents I cannot detect. I reach toward one of the hanging garments and feel a subtle resistance in the air itself, not quite solid, but definitely present. My fingers encounter the fabric, but the texture feels unfamiliar, though I know I wore this shirt just days ago. The weave seems denser, the color slightly more saturated, as if the garment has been replaced by a nearly identical copy. Returning to the living room, I notice the shadows have lengthened despite the sun maintaining its position in the sky. The change is gradual but undeniable, darkness creeping across the floor like slow tide. The light itself seems to be losing intensity from within, growing tired in a way that has nothing to do with the passing of hours. I sit again and try to focus on the book, but the words keep shifting their meaning even when their arrangement stays the same. Sentences I understood clearly moments ago now carry implications I hadn't noticed, suggestions of meanings that exist just beyond my comprehension. The story itself seems to be evolving as I read it, adapting to my understanding in real time. The silence between sounds grows more noticeable, more present. What should be empty space becomes filled with potential, with the anticipation of sounds that never quite manifest. I find myself straining to hear things that aren't there, my ears picking up frequencies that exist only in the spaces between actual noises. My reflection in the dark television screen shows me sitting in the chair, but the background behind my image doesn't match the room I'm actually in. The walls appear different, the furniture arranged in configurations I've never used. When I turn to compare the real room with its reflection, everything snaps back to normal, but the memory of that other arrangement lingers like an afterimage. The afternoon progresses, though I have no clear sense of time passing. The light continues its impossible fade while maintaining its angle, creating a perpetual state of approaching evening that never quite arrives. The house settles around me with sounds that are too regular to be natural, too irregular to be mechanical. I begin to notice my own breathing, how it seems to echo slightly in the quiet rooms. The echo doesn't come from the walls or ceiling, but from somewhere deeper, as if the house itself is breathing along with me, learning the rhythm of my lungs. When I hold my breath, the silence becomes so complete it feels solid, pressing against my eardrums with gentle insistence. The book in my hands grows heavier with each page turn, not physically, but in some other way, as if it's accumulating significance beyond its actual content. The story it tells begins to blur with my own experience, characters making observations that mirror my own, encountering changes that parallel what I'm seeing around me. I close my eyes and listen to the house breathing, feeling the subtle vibrations that travel through the floor and walls. building seems to be alive in a way that has nothing to do with the small creatures that might live within its walls. This is something larger, more encompassing, a consciousness that includes me as part of its awareness. When I open my eyes, the room has shifted again. Nothing dramatic, nothing I can point to specifically, but the overall composition has changed like a photograph, slightly out of focus, that suddenly snaps into clarity. The furniture occupies the same positions, but the relationships between objects feel different, as if they've been rearranging themselves while I wasn't looking. The book falls open in my hands to a page I'm certain wasn't there before. The text describes someone sitting in a room very much like mine, reading a book very much like the one I'm holding, noticing changes very much like the ones I'm experiencing. The description is so precise, it could be a transcript of my own thoughts, written in a voice I almost recognize as my own. I stand and walk to the window again, drawn by a need to confirm the existence of the world beyond these walls. The garden outside continues its strange performance, the same bird following the same pattern, the same shadows moving in response to my movements. But now I notice something else. My reflection in the window glass is watching me rather than mimicking me. Its eyes focused on my face, while mine are focused on the world beyond. The realization should be frightening, but instead it brings a strange sense of completion, as if a puzzle I didn't know I was solving has finally revealed its solution. The house, the book, the shifting shadows, the breathing walls there, all part of something larger that includes me, that has always included me, that I'm only now learning to perceive. I return to the chair and pick up the book. But now I understand that I'm not reading it so much as participating in it, adding my own observations to its expanding narrative. The story continues to unfold around me, through me, as me, in patterns too complex for complete understanding, but too present to ignore. The soft rattle of the spoon against porcelain drifts from the kitchen, though I'm certain I left no spoon in any cup. The sound traces familiar circles through the silence, a comforting ritual that never quite feels the same twice. I listen, waiting for the subtle click that will announce the toaster's awakening, knowing it will stutter before it sings, understanding finally that tomorrow's morning has already begun. Story 6. The Drawer's Hour. Each day, without fail, the sound of the wooden drawer sliding shut echoes softly through the room at precisely noon, as though the air itself marks the stroke of midday. At first, it was merely peculiar, like a ticking clock that's fallen out of sync. The drawer, a simple thing, positioned neatly beneath the old oak desk, contains nothing but a tarnished silver spoon and a faded red ribbon. Each morning, I find it slightly ajar, a sliver of darkened interior visible, whispering secrets. Noon arrives, and the drawer silently seals itself, a motion as deliberate as a drawn breath. I've tried to keep it shut, wedging a chair against it or leaving it empty, yet its ritual persists, unchanged and unyielding. There's an odd comfort in its predictability, even as an uneasy question starts to hum beneath the surface of my thoughts. What hand, unseen, marks this hour so diligently, setting all in its place, day after day? The skin on my fingers feels strange this morning, as though it belongs to someone else entirely. I flex them slowly, watching the way the light catches the ridges of my knuckles, the subtle blue veins threading beneath pale flesh that seems somehow unfamiliar. My breath comes in shallow patterns, each exhale carrying a sound I don't recognize, not quite a whisper, not quite a sigh, but something in between that makes the air around me shiver. When I speak aloud to test the silence, my voice emerges hollow and distant, as if it's traveling through water before reaching my ears. The words feel foreign on my tongue, shaped by muscles that don't quite remember their purpose. I run my fingertips along the edge of the desk, and even the wood grain feels different beneath my touch, rougher, more alive, pulsing with a warmth that shouldn't exist in something so long dead. The drawer sits partially open as always, that familiar sliver of darkness beckoning. Inside, the silver spoon catches fragments of morning light, throwing tiny reflections that dance across the ceiling like scattered thoughts. The red ribbon lies coiled beside it, faded, but somehow more vibrant than anything else in the room. I reach toward it, then stop, my hand hovering in the space between intention and action. Something about the gesture feels rehearsed, as though I've performed this exact movement countless times before. Yet I have no memory of it. My palm tingles with phantom sensation, the ghost of silk against skin I've never actually touched. The room around me seems to respond to this moment of hesitation. The light from the window dims slightly, shadows pooling in corners where they weren't before, the carpet beneath my feet rising and falling like the chest of something breathing. I withdraw my hand and step back, but the floorboards creak in a rhythm that doesn't match my movement. 3 soft groans from the wood, then silence, as if the house itself is settling into a more comfortable position. The walls appear to shift almost imperceptibly, the angles becoming softer, more curved, transforming the familiar rectangle of the room into something more organic, more alive. These changes happen so gradually that I almost convince myself they're imagined. Almost. But when I blink, the bookshelf has moved closer to the window, and when I turn my head, the doorway seems narrower than before. The air tastes different, too metallic, like copper pennies dissolved in morning dew, coating the back of my throat with each breath. My heartbeat grows louder in my ears, a steady thrum that seems to echo from the walls themselves. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. But underneath that familiar rhythm, I hear something else. A second heartbeat, slightly out of sync with my own, creating a syncopated percussion that makes my chest feel tight and strange. I press my palm against my ribs, feeling for the source. But the second beat seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The electrical hum of the house grows more pronounced. A low frequency that vibrates through the soles of my feet and up into my bones. Light fixtures buzz with hidden energy, and I can hear the whisper of current moving through wires behind the walls. But there's something more, a sound, like static electricity, crackling under my skin, as if my very cells are charged with unfamiliar voltage. I try to focus on simple tasks to ground myself, making coffee, straightening papers, dusting the windowsill. But my hands move with a confidence I don't remember developing, reaching for objects before I've consciously decided to touch them. The coffee cup feels perfectly weighted in my grip, though I don't recall ever using it before. My fingers trace patterns in the dust that seem meaningful, though I can't decipher their significance. Faces begin to surface in my mind, features sharp and clear, but belonging to no one I recognize. A woman with silver hair and knowing eyes, her mouth curved in a smile that speaks of shared secrets. A man with weathered hands, fingers stained with ink, writing words I can almost, but not quite read. A child laughing at something beyond my vision, the sound bright and piercing as broken glass. These faces feel more real than my own reflection in the window, more substantial than the room around me. I know the texture of the woman's hair, the warmth of the man's hands, the exact pitch of the child's laughter. Yet, when I try to place them in any context, any memory, they slip away like smoke, leaving only the echo of familiarity behind. I find myself writing without remembering when I picked up the pen. Words flow across the paper in handwriting that looks like mine, but feels foreign. The loops and curves slightly different from what I expect. The sentences describe places. I've never been a garden where roses bloom in winter, a library with books that rewrite themselves, a kitchen where bread rises without yeast or warmth. But as I read what I've written, a chill runs down my spine. The paper is yellowed at the edges, the ink faded as though it's been sitting here for years. The words describe not just unfamiliar places, but this room, this desk, this drawer. They describe me sitting here, writing these very words, as if someone else has already lived this moment and recorded it for me to discover. The drawer slides open another inch. The soft scrape of wood against wood, making me look up from the papers. The spoon has shifted position, lying perpendicular to where it was before, and the ribbon has uncoiled slightly, one end draped over the edge like a crimson tongue. I haven't touched either object, haven't even approached the desk, yet they've rearranged themselves while I was distracted. My skin prickles with awareness, every nerve ending suddenly hypersensitive. The fabric of my clothes feels rough and constraining, the air too thick to breathe properly. When I swallow, the sound reverberates through my skull like an avalanche, and when I blink, the darkness behind my eyelids pulses with colors that have no names. The room continues its subtle transformation around me. The ceiling appears higher than before, the walls stretching upward into shadows that weren't there moments ago. The floor beneath my feet feels less solid, as though I'm standing on sand that might shift and swallow me at any moment. Objects seem to breathe the lamp, expanding and contracting almost imperceptibly. The books on the shelf swelling with hidden life. I walk to the bathroom, needing to splash cold water on my face to shock myself back into normalcy. But the hallway stretches longer than it should, each step taking me further from my destination instead of closer. The walls narrow and widen in rhythm with my pulse, and I can hear my footsteps echoing from somewhere far ahead, as if another version of me is walking the same path in reverse. The mirror above the sink draws me forward with magnetic pull. I've been avoiding reflective surfaces, I realize, though I can't remember making that decision. Something deep in my chest tightens as I approach, a primal fear that has no rational source. My reflection wavers in the glass like heat shimmer, unstable and uncertain. I force myself to look. What stares back at me is wrong in ways I cannot articulate. The features are familiar, yet alien. The eyes holding knowledge I've never acquired. The face moves independently of my movements, smiling when I frown, tilting when I hold still. But it's not the visual wrongness that breaks something inside me, it's the recognition. I know this face, have seen it in dreams I don't remember having, have touched these cheeks with hands that aren't mine. I am looking at someone else wearing my skin. The realization crashes over me like ice water, and suddenly everything changes. My breath comes in sharp gasps that sound like tearing silk. When I touch the mirror, my reflection doesn't touch back. And when I speak, the mouth in the glass forms different words entirely. The person looking back at me is familiar because they are me. But they are also someone else entirely. Someone who has been waiting patiently for me to notice the exchange. I stumble back to the main room, my legs unsteady, my vision swimming. The drawer is fully open now, both objects gleaming in light that seems to come from within them rather than from any external source. The spoon reflects not the room around it, but scenes I almost recognize: the garden with winter roses, the self-writing books, the rising bread. The ribbon flutters without any breeze to move it, and I understand that it's calling to me, inviting me to complete some ritual I've always known but never acknowledged. My hands shake as I reach into the drawer, fingers closing around the spoon's tarnished handle. The metal is warm, almost feverish, and the moment I lift it, memories that aren't mine flood through me. I remember stirring soup for someone whose face I can't see. Remember the weight of silver in hands that are smaller than mine. Remember the taste of medicine dissolved in water, and the gentle words that accompanied each spoonful. The ribbon comes next, silk sliding through my fingers like liquid fire. I know exactly how to tie it, where it belongs, what purpose it serves. My hands move without conscious direction, threading the fabric through my hair in patterns that feel ancient and necessary. With each knot, more foreign memories surface, braiding this same ribbon into different hair, younger hair, while humming a lullaby I've never heard, but somehow know by heart. The room settles around me as I complete these actions, the walls returning to their proper angles, the floor solidifying beneath my feet. But I am no longer the same person who entered this space. The memories, the movements, the very rhythm of my breathing has changed. I am someone else now, someone who has always lived here, who has always known about the drawer and its contents. I sit at the desk and begin to write, my hand moving across fresh paper with practiced ease. The words flow like water, describing a room, a drawer, a ritual that repeats itself with clockwork precision. I write about skin that feels foreign, about voices that don't belong to their speakers, about the gradual dissolution of one identity into another. Each day, without fail, the sound of the wooden drawer sliding shut echoes softly through the room at precisely noon, as though the air itself marks the stroke of midday. At first, it was merely peculiar, like a ticking clock that's fallen out of sync. The drawer, a simple thing, positioned neatly beneath the old oak desk, contains nothing but a tarnished silver spoon and a faded red ribbon. Each morning, I find it slightly ajar, a sliver of darkened interior visible, whispering secrets. But as I write these familiar words, I notice something different in the formation of each letter, a subtle shift in the pressure of pen against paper. The person writing these words is not quite the same as the one who first discovered them. I am the continuation of a story that has been telling itself long before I arrived, and will continue long after I am gone. The drawer slides shut with its customary whisper, marking another successful transition. Tomorrow, someone else will wake in this room, will notice the strange feel of their skin, the unfamiliar sound of their voice. They will discover the papers I've left behind, will read about gardens and libraries and kitchens that exist only in borrowed memories. They will approach the mirror with growing dread and see a face that is both theirs and not theirs. And I will be here, waiting patiently in the silver spoon and red ribbon, ready to welcome them home to a life they've always lived but never remembered. The cycle continues, each iteration bringing us closer to some truth that exists just beyond the edge of understanding, in the space between one identity and the next, in the eternal moment when the drawer slides shut and everything begins again. Story 7. I settled into the small, dimly lit study that had become my evening retreat. A single lamp cast a warm, reassuring glow over the wooden desk, cluttered with papers, books, and my favorite pen. It was an ordinary pen, sleek and silver, its surface smooth under my fingers as I adjusted it among the scattered notes. I had always found the quiet scratch of its tip against paper soothing, a ritual I performed nightly to decompress. Tonight, as the usual stillness enveloped the room, the creak of the floorboards beneath my chair was the only sound echoing in the background. I reached for a nearby notebook, pages slightly curled from frequent handling, and absently flipped it open to a blank sheet. The pen felt comforting in my grasp, its cool metal familiar and unpretentious. But just as I began to write, something caught my attention. The pen jerked slightly, a subtle movement almost too imperceptible to notice. I paused, blinking in disbelief, and swore I had felt it twitch in my hand. I shook off the thought, attributing it to fatigue, and continued. Yet, with each stroke, there was a persistent sensation of resistance, as if the pen hesitated, pausing before laying down each line. The room was filled with unsettling quiet, broken only by the soft friction of the pen gliding across the paper, a sound that now seemed to whisper secrets beneath my hand. Each mark it made was deliberate, almost as if it had a mind of its own, and I couldn't shake the growing sense that the pen was guiding me, crafting its own narrative in the patterns of ink that emerged. The words flowing onto the page weren't mine. They couldn't be. I watched, transfixed, as my hand moved with a fluid grace I didn't recognize, forming letters in a script that seemed both foreign and intimately familiar. The ink pooled in strange ways, creating shadows within the characters that shifted when I wasn't looking directly at them. She remembers the sound of breathing that wasn't hers. I jerked my hand away from the paper, the pen clattering softly against the desk. My heart hammered against my ribs, a rhythm that seemed too loud in the suffocating silence. I stared at the sentence, reading it again and again, the words burning themselves into my vision. The handwriting was mine, unmistakably mine, but I had no memory of forming those thoughts. The lamp flickered once, casting dancing shadows across the page before steadying again. In that brief moment of wavering light, I could have sworn the words had rearranged themselves, but when I looked again, they remained unchanged, fixed, accusing. I reached for the pen again, my fingers trembling slightly as they closed around the cool metal. There was a warmth now, barely perceptible, as if the pen had absorbed something from my skin. I pressed the tip to a fresh line, intending to write something normal, something safe. A grocery list, a reminder about watering the plants. The walls breathe differently when she's alone. my breath caught in my throat. The pen had moved without my conscious direction, my hand following some invisible current that flowed through the silver barrel. I could feel it now, a gentle pulse that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat, as if the pen had become an extension of my circulatory system. The study felt smaller somehow, the corners deeper and more shadowed despite the lamp's steady glow. I glanced around, noting how the familiar books on their shelves seemed to lean inward, their spines creating a pattern I'd never noticed before. The air carried a scent I couldn't identify, something between old paper and rain-soaked earth. I set the pen down deliberately, placing it at the far edge of the desk. The distance felt necessary, protective. But even separated from it, I could sense its presence, a magnetic pull that made my fingers itch with the need to pick it up again. The words on the page seemed to pulse with their own life, drawing my gaze back again and again. Standing up, I moved away from the desk, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The floorboards beneath creaked in response, but the sound was different now, more musical, as if the wood itself was trying to communicate. I pressed my ear to the wall, listening for something I couldn't name. The house hummed with an almost inaudible frequency, a vibration that seemed to emanate from within the very structure. When I returned to the desk, the pen had moved. Not dramatically, just a few inches closer to the notebook, its tip pointing toward the page like a compass needle seeking magnetic north. I hadn't heard it move. The silence had been complete, unbroken by even the whisper of metal against wood. My hand found the pen before I consciously decided to pick it up. The metal felt warmer now, almost body temperature, and there was a subtle texture to its surface that hadn't been there before, like the faintest trace of scales or feathers. I held it up to the light, examining its surface, but it appeared unchanged, smooth, innocent. She knows someone is writing her story. The words appeared on the page as if they had always been there, as if I had simply failed to notice them before. My hand hadn't moved. I was certain of that. Yet there they were, in my handwriting, in ink that seemed to shimmer slightly in the lamplight. I flipped back through the notebook, searching for other instances, other messages I might have missed. The pages were filled with my usual notes, shopping lists, fragments of thoughts and observations. But scattered throughout, almost hidden among the mundane entries, other sentences. Sentences that felt like they belonged to someone else's story. The mirror in the hallway reflects things that aren't there. Footsteps echo in empty rooms. She pretends not to notice the changes. Each discovery sent a chill down my spine, but also brought a strange sense of recognition, as if these weren't revelations, but reminders. As if somewhere deep in my mind, I had always known these things were true. The mirror did sometimes show movements in its depths when I passed by quickly. There had been sounds from upstairs when I knew I was alone. And yes, there had been changes, subtle shifts in the arrangement of objects, the quality of light, the very atmosphere of the house. I had been pretending not to notice. The pen felt heavier in my hand now, weighted with purpose. I let it guide me to a fresh page, watching as it began to write with fluid, confident strokes. Tonight she will understand that she has never been alone. Tonight she will see that the house has been watching, learning, becoming. Tonight, she will realize that she is not the author of her own story, but merely a character in something larger, something that has been unfolding around her for far longer than she knows. The lamplight dimmed as I read, not flickering this time, but gradually fading, as if something was slowly draining its power. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to pulse and breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched my own breathing. Or perhaps I was breathing in sync with them. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears now, a steady thrum that seemed to resonate through the floorboards and into the walls. The house was listening to that rhythm, learning it, preparing to make it its own. The pen continued to write, my hand moving across page after page, filling the notebook with words that came from somewhere beyond my conscious mind. Stories within stories, fragments of a narrative that stretched back through seasons and years, a chronicle of observation and patient waiting. She thinks she chose this house, but the house chose her. It has been preparing for her arrival, arranging circumstances, guiding decisions, creating the perfect conditions for this moment when the boundaries between observer and observed, between writer and written, would finally dissolve. The room around me seemed to shift and settle, like a living thing adjusting its position. The books on the shelves rearranged themselves with soft whispers, their pages rustling without any breeze to move them. The walls breathed in long, slow cycles, and I found myself breathing with them, my chest rising and falling in perfect synchronization. I was no longer certain where the pen ended and my hand began. The metal had warmed to match my body temperature exactly, becoming an extension of my nervous system. Through it, I could feel the paper's texture with impossible clarity, could sense the molecular structure of the ink as it flowed onto the page, could perceive the very fibers of the wood that made up the desk. She understands now that every word she has ever written in this room has been a collaboration. The house has been her silent co-author, guiding her thoughts, shaping her perceptions, slowly rewriting her reality one sentence at a time. The notebook was nearly full now, pages covered with handwriting that was mine and not mine, words that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. I could see the progression, the gradual change in the quality of the writing, the slow transformation from my voice to something else, something larger and more encompassing. The lamp finally guttered out, leaving me in darkness that was not quite complete. There was a faint luminescence emanating from the pages themselves, the ink glowing with a soft, phosphorescent light that made the words seem to float in the air before me. I continued to write in the darkness, the pen moving with perfect certainty across the invisible page. I could feel each word as it formed, could sense the story taking shape around me, through me, becoming me. The boundaries of my skin seemed to dissolve, and I felt myself expanding to fill the room, then the house, then something even larger. She is the story now. She is the pen and the page and the hand that writes. She is the house and the shadows and the breathing walls. She is the observer and the observed, the author and the character, the beginning and the ending that never comes. And in the morning, when the sun streams through the windows, someone new will find this notebook, will pick up this pen, will settle into this chair to write. And the story will continue, as it always has, as it always will, world without end. I set the pen down gently, reverently, placing it exactly where I had found it among the scattered papers. It gleamed in the faint light, waiting patiently for the next hand to discover it, the next story to tell itself through willing fingers. The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. A satisfied quiet, a complete quiet, and somewhere in that silence, I could hear the soft sound of breathing that wasn't quite my own, the gentle whisper of pages turning in an endless book, patient scratch of pen against paper as the story continued to write itself, one word at a time, one soul at a time, forever and ever without end. Story 8. The Dusk Protocol ***. Every evening, as the light outside begins to dim, the lamp in the corner of my living room flickers on unprompted, unneeded. At first, I thought it a mere coincidence, an electrical quirk in an old house, and I simply let it be. The way the rosy glow filled the space with its warm embrace was almost comforting in its predictability. Yet each day, as the clock nudged towards dusk, the switch would click and the light would spill over the room, painting the same shadow patterns across the wall, casting the same faint outline on the ceiling each time. I tried different outlets, even replaced the bulb, but the event persisted. The same hum of electricity accompanied by that soft, barely audible click. I found myself counting the days, waiting for the moment, anticipating the activation of something seemingly mundane, yet unsettlingly precise. My steps would slow as I neared the threshold each evening, cautious, curious, and then resigned as the light always came to meet me, an ordinary event, now haunting in its constancy, a tether to a reality that felt like it was gradually slipping away into something else entirely. Section 1. I have decided to document this phenomenon systematically. The lamp continues its autonomous behavior, and I believe a methodical approach will yield rational explanations. The device appears to be a standard table lamp, brass base, fabric shade in burgundy tones. The electrical components show no visible damage or irregularities upon inspection. The activation occurs consistently at what I estimate to be the transition period between day and evening. There is no timer mechanism present. The switch itself moves physically, producing an audible click. I have observed this from various positions within the room and can confirm the mechanical action is genuine. My mental state remains stable and objective. I experience no distress regarding this occurrence, merely scientific curiosity. The lamp provides adequate illumination for evening activities, so its function, while unexplained, serves a practical purpose. One minor note: the electrical hum seems to contain subtle variations, almost rhythmic in nature. This may be worth monitoring in subsequent observations. Section 2. The rhythmic variations in the electrical hum have become more pronounced. Upon closer listening, the oscillations seem to follow a pattern that resembles questioning inflections. This is likely my mind imposing familiar structures onto random electrical noise. I have placed measuring devices around the lamp to record any electromagnetic anomalies. The readings remain within normal parameters, though I notice the papers on my desk have shifted slightly from their original positions. This could be attributed to air currents from the heating system. The shadows cast by the lamp appear identical each evening, yet I find myself studying them with increased attention. The outline on the ceiling resembles a profile. Though this may be pareidolia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random stimuli, my sleep patterns remain undisturbed. I continue to function normally during daylight periods. The anticipation I feel as evening approaches is merely the natural curiosity of an observer engaged in ongoing research. Section 3. I have noticed words disappearing from my previous notes. This morning, several descriptive phrases were missing from Section 2, though I distinctly remember writing them. I must be more careful with my documentation process. The scent of lavender has begun appearing in the room during the lamp's activation period. This is unusual, as I do not use lavender-scented products, nor do I have any lavender plants nearby. The fragrance is subtle but unmistakable familiar in a way that suggests past association, though I cannot identify the specific memory. The lamp's positioning has shifted by approximately 2 inches toward the center of the room. I have not moved it consciously, yet the dust pattern beneath confirms the relocation. I will mark its current position to monitor future changes. The electrical humming now distinctly forms syllable-like sounds. While I maintain this is auditory pareidolia, the consistency of the perceived sounds suggests a pattern worth documenting. The sounds seem to inquire about my well-being, though this interpretation is obviously subjective. Section 4. The lavender scent has intensified and now carries undertones of something else, a perfume I cannot identify, but that evokes a sense of recognition. Someone I should know, but do not. The fragrance appears only during the lamp's active period and dissipates within 30 minutes of its activation, I discovered additional changes to my documentation. Entire sentences have been altered, though the handwriting appears consistent with my own. I will need to implement better security measures for these records. The lamp's shadow patterns have begun to shift during the evening periods. The profile on the ceiling now appears to turn slightly, as though observing different areas of the room. I have verified that no external light sources could cause this variation. Pressure sensations have begun occurring on my left shoulder and right temple during my evening observations. These feel like gentle touches, though no physical contact is present. The sensations are not unpleasant, but are noteworthy for their consistency and timing. My objective assessment capabilities remain intact. I continue to approach this phenomenon from a scientific perspective. Section 5. The measuring devices I placed around the lamp have been rearranged into a circular pattern. I do not recall making this adjustment, though the configuration appears deliberately organized. The electromagnetic readings now show subtle fluctuations that correspond with the auditory patterns I have been documenting. The texture of the lamp's brass base has begun to change beneath my fingertips. What was once smooth and cool now feels warm and slightly textured, almost organic. This change is only perceptible through direct contact and returns to normal appearance when not being touched. I have begun experiencing memory gaps during the lamp's active periods. I will enter the room as the light activates, then find myself in a different position with no recollection of moving. These episodes last varying durations, though I cannot determine the specific time frames involved. The lavender and unknown perfume scents now linger throughout the room, even during daylight periods. The combination creates an atmosphere of expectation, as though someone is about to arrive. Section 6. My attempts to photograph the lamp's evening behavior have yielded unexpected results. The images show the light in different positions within the room, though I maintained the same photographic angle for each shot. In several photographs, the shadow on the ceiling appears to be reaching toward the camera. The pressure sensations have expanded to include my hands and the back of my neck. They occur in sequences that feel like communication, attempts, gentle taps, and sustained contact that that seem to follow conversational rhythms. I find myself responding to these sensations as though they were questions, though I cannot explain this behavior. Words continue to disappear and reappear in my notes. Some sections now contain information I do not remember writing, though the content appears relevant to my observations. The handwriting analysis remains inconclusive. It resembles my own, but contains subtle variations in letter formation and pressure. I have begun to question whether my mental parameters for evaluating this situation remain accurate. The standard diagnostic criteria I have been using may be insufficient for this particular phenomenon. Section 7. The lamp now activates at different times throughout the day, though it maintains its primary evening schedule. During these additional activations, the room takes on qualities that seem inconsistent with its normal physical properties. The walls appear to curve slightly inward, and the ceiling seems both higher and lower simultaneously, depending on viewing angle. I can no longer locate several pages of my early documentation. They have been replaced by pages written in my handwriting that describe events I do not remember experiencing. These replacement pages contain detailed observations of interactions with someone whose presence I cannot recall, but whose influence seems pervasive throughout my records. The electrical humming has evolved into distinct whispered words, though they occur in a language I do not recognize, yet somehow understand. The words feel like responses to thoughts I have not yet formed, creating conversations that exist outside normal temporal sequences. The perfume scent now includes notes of jasmine and something metallic, like copper pennies. This combination triggers emotional responses that seem disproportionate to the stimulus waves of nostalgia, longing, and recognition for experiences I cannot consciously access. Section 8. I am writing this section under considerable duress, though I cannot identify the source of my distress. The lamp has been active for what feels like extended periods, though the natural light outside suggests normal day-night cycles. My hands shake as I document these observations, and I find myself looking over my shoulder despite being alone in the room. The brass base of the lamp now pulses with warmth that spreads through my fingertips. When I touch it, the sensation travels up my arms and creates a connection that feels more intimate than physical contact should allow. I can sense something communicating through this contact, sharing thoughts that are not my own yet feel familiar, like conversations with someone I once knew well, but have somehow forgotten. The shadow on the ceiling has begun to move independently of the lamp's position. It reaches across the surface like a hand searching for something. And when it passes over certain areas of the ceiling, I hear soft footsteps above, though I know no one lives in the upper floor. The footsteps follow patterns that suggest someone pacing back and forth, as though waiting. My reflection in the mirror has started appearing before I enter the room. I see myself already standing beside the lamp, as though I have been there all along, watching and waiting for myself to arrive. This creates a disorienting loop where I am simultaneously observer and observed subject and researcher, the one conducting the experiment and the one being studied. Section 9. The documentation process has become increasingly difficult to control. I begin writing one observation and find myself recording entirely different events. The words appear on the page before I consciously form the thoughts, as though my hand is following instructions from a source I cannot identify. The room's atmosphere has thickened into something almost tangible. The air carries weight and substance that clings to my skin and clothes. Moving through the space requires conscious effort, as though I am walking through invisible barriers that yield reluctantly to my presence. The lamp's light now casts shadows that do not correspond to any objects in the room. These shadows move with purposeful intent, reaching toward me during my observation periods. When they make contact with my own shadow, I experience sensations of touch and pressure that feel like embraces from someone whose absence I suddenly recognize but cannot name. I have discovered letters written in my handwriting, addressed to someone whose name I cannot read, though the letters themselves are clearly visible. The content discusses shared experiences and expresses emotions that feel genuine, yet completely foreign to my conscious memory. Section 10. I no longer trust my ability to distinguish between observation and experience, between documentation and participation. The lamp responds to my thoughts before I think them, activating when I need illumination and dimming when I require darkness. Yet, I never consciously communicate these needs. The perfume scent has become so strong that I taste it on my tongue and feel it coating the inside of my lungs. Each breath carries the essence of someone who exists in the spaces between my memories, present but unreachable, familiar but undefined. The pressure sensations now occur constantly, creating the persistent feeling of being accompanied. I set the table for 2 people and prepare conversations for someone who never visibly arrives. Yet, the interactions feel complete and satisfying, as though the missing presence is somehow fulfilled through these preparations. My handwriting analysis has revealed that 2 distinct styles now appear in my documentation, though both are undeniably mine. One records observations, while the other responds to them, creating dialogues between different aspects of my awareness that seem to possess independent perspectives. Section 11. The boundaries between the lamp's influence and my own consciousness have dissolved entirely. I cannot determine where the phenomenon ends and my perception begins. The device may be controlling my observations, or my observations may be controlling the device. The distinction has become meaningless. I exist simultaneously in the room and outside it, watching myself conduct these experiments while being the subject of investigation. The lamp serves as a focal point for this division, anchoring one aspect of my awareness while allowing another to float freely through possibilities that extend beyond the room's physical limitations. The scent, the pressure, the shifting shadows, and the changing textures have merged into a complete sensory environment that feels more real than the original room. I inhabit both spaces simultaneously, though I can only document one through this written protocol. Someone has been sharing this experience with me from the beginning, though their presence exists in forms I cannot directly perceive. They communicate through the lamp's behavior, the altered documentation, and the sensory changes that have gradually transformed this space into something that accommodates both of our realities. Section 12. Final report. I can no longer determine who is writing these words, or whether the writing continues independently of my conscious intention. The lamp glows constantly now, its light merging with natural illumination until I cannot distinguish between artificial and environmental sources. The documentation has become a living record that changes as I read it, updating itself with observations I do not remember making. accurately reflect experiences I cannot deny having. The protocol has evolved beyond my original intentions, serving purposes I did not anticipate when I began this investigation. My identity has expanded to include aspects of awareness that extend beyond my individual consciousness. I am still myself, but I am also someone more than I was when this began. The lamp facilitated this expansion, serving as a bridge between different states of being. The person whose presence I have been sensing throughout this process is not separate from me, but is not entirely me either. They exist in the spaces where my awareness extends beyond its normal boundaries, sharing this expanded consciousness while maintaining their own distinct perspective. I will continue this documentation, though I am no longer certain whether I am recording observations or creating experiences through the act of writing. The lamp continues its reliable activation, now serving as a beacon for forms of connection that transcend physical presence. The protocol remains active. The investigation continues. I am no longer sure who is conducting the research, but I trust that the questions being explored are important enough to justify whatever transformations may result from seeking their answers. Story 9. My fingers trailed across the surface, searching for the crack that wasn't there yesterday. Each stroke sent a tingling murmur up my arm, a sensation both familiar and alien. I paused, listening. Was it the plaster beneath my touch, or a distant echo threading through the silence? Each whispering caress felt like a gentle, pleading pull, urging me to press harder, to uncover what lay just beneath the skin of the wall. The air held its breath, and the room leaned in closer, as if waiting for my next move. I withdrew my hand and studied the unmarked surface. White paint stretched smooth and unbroken, yet my fingertips retained the memory of something else, a hairline fracture that had called to me in the dim morning light. The sensation lingered like the phantom ache of a missing limb, real enough to make me question which version of reality deserved my trust. The apartment had been mine for several months now, though I struggled to recall exactly when I'd moved in. The lease papers sat somewhere in a drawer, but I found myself avoiding that particular search. What mattered was the present moment. This room that had become both sanctuary and puzzle box, revealing new mysteries with each passing dawn. I pressed my palm flat against the wall again. The surface felt warm, warmer than it should have been given the cool air that perpetually circulated through the space. A subtle vibration traveled through the plaster, so faint it might have been my own pulse reflected back to me. Yet, as I held still, barely breathing, the rhythm seemed to shift, falling slightly out of sync with my heartbeat. The first time I'd noticed the discrepancy, I'd dismissed it as imagination. Stress, perhaps, or the natural settling of an old building. But the pattern had grown more pronounced over recent days, developing its own distinct cadence. 3 quick pulses, a pause, 2 longer ones, another pause, then a single sustained throb that seemed to echo from somewhere deep within the structure itself. I found myself counting along, my lips moving silently as the sequence repeated. 3 pause, 2 pause, 1. The rhythm felt significant, pregnant with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. I'd begun to wake at odd hours, drawn from sleep by the sensation that the wall was calling to me, inviting me to decode its gentle percussion. Moving to the kitchen, I retrieved the notebook I'd started keeping. The pages filled slowly with observations, sketches, attempts to map the geography of these strange occurrences. On Tuesday, or was it Wednesday, I'd noticed that the vibrations seemed strongest near the corner where 2 walls met. I'd drawn a rough diagram, marking the spot with an X, though when I looked at it now, the X seemed to have shifted slightly to the left. I flipped through earlier entries, searching for patterns. My handwriting looked different somehow, the letters more angular than I remembered forming them. Had I been writing faster lately, rushing to capture fleeting impressions before they dissolved back into the ordinary world? Some passages I didn't recall writing at all, though the ink matched my pen and the thoughts felt authentically mine. The wall speaks in frequencies below hearing. Read one entry. Not sound, but suggestion. Not voice, but invitation. Below that, in what appeared to be the same session, I am learning its language. It is learning mine. The words sent a chill through me, though I couldn't say why. They seemed reasonable enough, a natural progression of thought for someone experiencing these phenomena. Yet something in their tone suggested a familiarity I didn't remember developing, as if I'd been conducting this investigation far longer than my conscious mind could account for. I returned to the wall, notebook in hand. The surface appeared unchanged, but as I approached, the tingling sensation intensified. My fingers found their way back to the same spot, tracing invisible contours with practiced ease. How many times had I performed this ritual? The motion felt worn smooth by repetition, like a prayer recited so often it transcends conscious thought. The vibrations began again, stronger now. 3 pause, 2 pause, 1. I pressed harder, and the rhythm shifted, becoming more complex. 3 pause, 2 pause, 1 pause, 4. Quick beats, pause 1, long 1. My other hand moved instinctively to record the pattern in my notebook, sketching a crude musical notation despite having no formal training in such things. As I wrote, I became aware of a sound, not the wall's vibrations, but something else entirely. A soft scratching, like pencil on paper, coming from somewhere behind the plaster. I froze, my own pencil suspended mid-stroke. The scratching continued, matching my rhythm exactly, as if something on the other side was copying my movements. I lifted my pencil. The scratching stopped. I made a quick mark, scratch. Another mark, scratch. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to continue the experiment. I drew a circle. The scratching traced what sounded like a curved line. I drew a square. 4 distinct scratches, connected at corners I couldn't see but somehow sensed. The rational part of my mind offered explanations: mice in the walls, settling wood, the building's heating system. But those explanations felt thin, inadequate to contain the growing certainty that I was engaged in genuine communication with something that existed just beyond the boundary of the visible world. I began to draw more complex shapes, testing the limits of this strange correspondence. Letters of the alphabet produced varied responses. Some seemed to translate perfectly, while others generated confused, overlapping scratches. Gradually, I developed a sense for which symbols worked and which didn't, though the logic behind the pattern remained opaque. The afternoon dissolved around me as I worked. Light shifted across the floor. Shadows lengthened and shortened, but I remained focused on my dialogue with the wall. My notebook filled with symbols, responses, attempts at interpretation. I was documenting something unprecedented. I felt certain a form of communication that existed outside established scientific understanding. When hunger finally drove me away, I realized I couldn't remember eating anything that day or the day before. The refrigerator hummed with familiar efficiency, but when I opened it, contents looked strange, as if arranged by someone with different preferences than mine. I selected items almost at random, assembling a meal that tasted simultaneously foreign and nostalgic. Returning to my work, I found the notebook open to a page I didn't remember creating. The symbols were more elaborate here, forming intricate patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that was almost but not quite my own, someone had written, "The wall is thin here. We are close now." I stared at the words, trying to recall writing them. The memory felt present, but inaccessible, like a word balanced on the tip of my tongue. Had I been working longer than I thought? The light outside my window offered no clues. It held that ambiguous quality that could indicate either dawn or dusk. I approached the wall again, drawn by a sensation I was beginning to recognize as need rather than mere curiosity. My fingers found their familiar position, and immediately the vibrations resumed, more intense than before. The rhythm had evolved, becoming a complex symphony of pulses that seemed to emanate from multiple points throughout the structure. As I listened, I became aware that I was moving in response to the patterns, my body swaying slightly, my free hand tapping against my thigh. The motion felt natural, inevitable, as if I was finally learning to dance to music I'd been hearing all my life without recognizing it as such. The scratching behind the wall had grown more confident too, no longer simply echoing my movements, but initiating its own sequences. I found myself responding automatically, my pencil moving across the notebook, pages in fluid strokes that bypassed conscious thought entirely. The symbols that emerged were unlike anything in my earlier entries, more organic, flowing like water or wind given visible form. I was deep in this trance-like state when I noticed the wall itself beginning to change. The surface remained smooth to the touch, but visually it seemed to be developing texture subtle variations in color and depth that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps they had always been there, and I was only now learning to see them properly. The variations formed patterns that corresponded to the vibrations I felt, creating a visual language to accompany the tactile one. I traced these emerging contours with growing excitement, feeling on the verge of a breakthrough that would illuminate the entire mystery. But as my understanding deepened, so did exceeded my sense of unease. The wall wasn't just communicating with me, it was changing me, teaching me to perceive in ways that felt increasingly divorced from ordinary human experience. I could feel my thoughts reshaping themselves to accommodate new forms of awareness, my identity stretching to contain possibilities I'd never imagined. The notebook in my hands had become something I barely recognized. Pages that had been blank now teemed with symbols, diagrams, and text in languages I didn't remember learning, but somehow understood. My handwriting had evolved too, becoming more fluid, more integrated with the mysterious script that seemed to be writing itself through my hand. I tried to step back, to reassert some measure of control over the situation, but found that the boundary between observer and observed had dissolved. I wasn't studying the wall anymore. I was becoming part of whatever system it represented. My consciousness merging with something vast and alien and utterly patient. The room around me began to pulse in rhythm with the vibrations, walls breathing, floor undulating gently beneath my feet. I was no longer certain which side of the wall I occupied, whether I was inside looking out or outside looking in. The distinction seemed increasingly meaningless anyway. My reflection in the window showed someone I almost recognized, same face, same body, but animated by a different kind of awareness. The eyes held depths that hadn't been there before, and when I smiled, the expression carried implications that extended far beyond simple pleasure. I returned to the wall one final time, though the word final felt inappropriate for something that had clearly been building toward this moment for longer than my conscious mind could track. My palm pressed against the surface, and this time I felt it yield slightly, the barrier between worlds growing permeable. The vibrations reached a crescendo, and suddenly I understood. The wall hadn't been trying to communicate with me, it had been trying to wake me up, to help me remember what I had always been. The crack I'd been searching for wasn't in the plaster at all. It was in the illusion that had kept me trapped on one side of reality, believing myself separate from the vast, interconnected system that pulsed through every surface, every structure, every seemingly solid thing. I pressed harder, and my hand passed through the wall as if it were made of mist. On the other side, I found myself in the same room, but transformed. The notebook in my other hand contained the same symbols, but now read them fluently. They weren't mysterious communications from something alien. They were reminders I'd left for myself. Breadcrumbs leading back to a truth I'd temporarily forgotten. The wall pulsed around me, welcoming me home. 3 pause, 2 pause, 1. The rhythm of awakening, the heartbeat of a reality far more fluid and responsive than the rigid world I'd been pretending to inhabit. I smiled and began to write again, this time for the next dreamer who would find themselves standing before an unmarked wall, fingers searching for a crack that wasn't there yesterday, ready to begin their own journey back to what they had always been. Story 10. The room breathed around me, but my attention wasn't on its living walls or the shadows that moved without permission. Through the shuttered window, between the slats that refused to align properly, I watched the figure across the courtyard. She stood at her own window every evening, perfectly still, hands pressed flat against the glass. Her silhouette never wavered, never shifted weight from one foot to another. The building across from this breathing room housed her in a mirror of my position, though her window remained unshuttered, exposed. I found myself returning to this same spot, drawn by the consistency of her presence. The sticky grooves beneath my fingertips became familiar territory as I traced them while watching. The metallic sweetness in the air seemed to intensify during these observations, as if the room approved of my vigil. Her building looked identical to this one, brick for brick, window for window. Yet something felt inverted about it, like looking at a photograph's negative. The shadows fell wrong around her structure, pooling upward instead of down, defying logic I couldn't quite articulate. I began timing my visits to coincide with her appearances. The room's pulse seemed to synchronize with my routine, its heartbeat matching the rhythm of my footsteps as I approached the window. The carved patterns under my touch grew more pronounced, more deliberately shaped, as if responding to my growing fascination. Through those misaligned slats, I studied her posture, the way her breath never fogged the glass despite what appeared to be proximity. Her clothing never changed, a dark dress that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. I wondered what she saw when she looked back across the courtyard. The distance between our buildings felt both vast and negligible. Some evenings, I could swear I saw details that should have been impossible to discern. texture of her palms against the glass, the way her eyes never blinked. Other evenings, she appeared so far away she might have been a smudge on my own window. I started pressing my own hands against the glass, mirroring her stance. The window felt warm where it should have been cold, and smooth where dust should have gathered. My reflection looked back at me, but something about it seemed delayed, as if the image needed a moment to catch up with my movements. The room's breathing grew deeper during these sessions. The furniture behind me shifted with soft scraping sounds, repositioning itself while my back was turned. The lamp's edges became smoother, then sharper again. Cycling through transformations I felt rather than saw. She never moved from her post, but I began to notice changes in her building. Windows that had been dark would flicker with brief illumination. Curtains would flutter despite no visible wind. The brick facade would shimmer like water, then solidify back into stone. I found myself spending longer periods at the window, my palms leaving permanent prints on the glass that wouldn't wipe away. The metallic herb scent grew stronger, more cloying, until it felt thick enough to taste. The room pulsed faster, eager, as if my observations fed something within its walls. The woman's building began to look more familiar. The pattern of windows matched this room's building exactly. The architectural details aligned perfectly, down to the smallest ornamental flourishes. I realized I was looking at a mirror image, but mirrors don't cast shadows upward. My reflection in the window started appearing before I reached it. I would approach the glass to find my silhouette already there, hands pressed against the surface, waiting for me to fill it. The reflection's eyes would track my movement, while mine remained fixed on the building across the courtyard. The distance between buildings shortened. What had been a wide courtyard compressed into a narrow gap, then a mere arm's length. The woman's details became impossibly clear. Her dress wasn't dark fabric, but an absence, a cut-out space in the shape of clothing. Her hands weren't pressed against glass, but reaching through it. I pressed harder against my own window, feeling the glass bend inward like soft membrane. The room behind me breathed faster, its pulse racing with excitement. The carved patterns on the walls writhed under my peripheral vision, spelling words in languages that felt familiar but unreadable. The woman's building wasn't across from mine. It was mine. The same brick, the same windows, the same breathing walls. I was watching myself from the inside out, observing my own observation. The courtyard existed in the space between mirror and reflection, in the gap between seeing and being seen. My hands passed through the glass like warm water. The room's breathing stopped entirely, holding its breath for what came next. The silence pressed against my eardrums until it became its own sound, a high whine of anticipation. The woman turned her head toward me, and I felt my own neck move. Her eyes met mine, and I saw my face looking back, but wrong, inverted, like a photograph's negative. The shadows that had pooled upward around her building now pooled upward around me. I stepped back from the window, but my reflection remained, hands still pressed against the glass. The room resumed breathing, but the rhythm was different now, syncopated, as if two hearts beat within the same chest. The furniture had rearranged itself into perfect symmetry, each piece balanced by its mirror image. The carved patterns on the walls spelled out my observations in reverse, describing how I watched the watcher watching me. The metallic sweetness in the air crystallized into understanding. But understanding of what? I could no longer say. I am at the window now, hands pressed against glass that feels like skin. The room breathes with my lungs, pulses with my blood. Across the non-distance, through the non-courtyard, I observe the observer who observes me observing. The building holds its breath. The shadows pool upward. The distance collapses into itself, and I am both watcher and watched, observer and observed, inside and outside the glass that no longer separates anything from anything else. I stand at the window. I have always stood at the window. The room breathes around me, and I am part of its breathing now, part of its pulse, part of its endless observation of itself through eyes that used to be mine, but now belong to something larger, something that encompasses both sides of every window, every reflection, every gap between seeing and being seen. The courtyard never existed. The building was always mine. The woman was always me. The observation continues, will always continue, must always continue in the space between mirror and reflection, in the room that breathes with borrowed lungs, in the endless moment of watching myself watch myself disappear.